Thank you. The next item of business is a statement by John Swinney on COVID-19, update in schools and remote learning arrangements. The Cabinet Secretary will take questions at the end of his statement, so there should be no interventions or interruptions. And I call on John Swinney. Cabinet Secretary, please.
Presiding Officer, Scottish education is today focused on ensuring our children receive the high-quality learning to which they are entitled, despite the current challenging circumstances. In this statement, I will set out what remote learning means for young people, teachers and parents, what our young people are entitled to expect, and the measures being put in place to make sure they receive that support. As we consider the educational provision available, it is vital we acknowledge the importance of ensuring our children's health and well-being is supported during the pandemic. That has been a fundamental priority of the education system since schools returned in August, and it will remain a fundamental priority during this period of remote learning. Children can only learn well if they feel well. At the outset, I want to reiterate my firm view that the best place for young people to learn is in school. We are doing everything we can to allow them to return safely as soon as possible, but in the meantime, their learning must be sustained and must be as rich and rewarding as possible. Remote learning is learning directed by teachers and undertaken by young people not physically with a teacher while instruction is taking place. Remote learning will not replicate in-school teaching in style, approach or hours of delivery. But what constituted high-quality learning, teaching and assessment prior to the pandemic is what constitutes high-quality learning, teaching and assessment now. It remains the responsibility of Scotland's dedicated teaching professionals to plan, organise and deliver that learning. I know our teachers are deploying their professional skills and rising to the challenges posed by the current situation. Remote learning involves a combination of live interactions between teachers and learners, and learning which takes place away from the direct presence of the teacher. Online learning is important, but not the only aspect. Education Scotland has published guidance explaining the definition and principles which govern remote learning, together with clarity on what young people and their families are entitled to expect, while it is not possible for all pupils to be in school. Remote learning activities will offer pupils opportunities to develop and progress, be assessed and receive feedback, engage with age and stage appropriate activities and receive opportunities which will account for additional needs, disadvantage or vulnerability. Good communication between home and school is fundamental to ensuring a shared understanding of the approach and everyone's responsibilities. Young people should have access to appropriate physical resources where needed. Examples may include learning materials or digital devices. They are entitled to access high-quality interactive remote learning and teaching using technology or other methods with an appropriate balance of live learning and independent activity and ongoing dialogue with teachers. Support available includes access to online resources to aid interaction, assessment and feedback. Each learner is entitled to a daily check-in appropriate to age, stage and need. They will have regular opportunities for engagement with other pupils. All of this must, as ever, be underpinned by due regard for young people's well-being and safeguarding. It is right that schools and teachers make the appropriate decisions for the young people they know, whilst delivering the entitlements set out in guidance to ensure everyone receives a consistently high-quality experience. Presiding Officer, I'll now outline the resources developed for remote learning and teaching. We have significantly enhanced the national e-learning offer, growing the provision for live remote learning, recorded lessons and supported learning. The expanded offer includes eSchool, which currently encompasses 27 courses ranging from National 5 to Advanced Higher, including live webinar lessons for Advanced Higher pupils. It includes a bank of online recorded lessons and 14,000 items of supported online learning and teaching materials, including resources for teachers to use in planning and delivery. Access to this work is made possible for learners across Scotland through the GLOW platform, our national online learning environment. Indeed, our commitment to GLOW over many years demonstrates Scotland's long recognition that digital technology can enhance learning and teaching, and other parts of the United Kingdom have sought to learn from our experiences in the field of online learning. Through their local authority GLOW login, every learner and teacher in Scotland has access to a comprehensive range of digital tools, including Microsoft Office 365 and Google Classroom. I can confirm that the problems experienced by some schools with Microsoft Teams on Monday have been resolved by Microsoft, with the service operating as expected. These were not related to GLOW, they were experienced by Microsoft users across the United Kingdom and parts of Europe. We continue to work with Microsoft to keep the service under constant review. In November 2020, Glow saw over 420,000 users logging on over 7.6 million times, compared to approximately 260,000 users logging onto the platform around 3.7 million times during the same month in 2019. After the last period of school building closures, we commissioned an equity audit published today to better understand the impact on children's learning, health and well-being, particularly those experiencing disadvantage. The equity audit provides important evidence to help us target mitigations effectively during this period of remote learning. We've taken action to ensure disadvantaged children and young people have access to the devices and connectivity needed to engage in education. The £25 million provided in the summer will deliver well over 70,000 devices for learners across Scotland. By end of December 2020, almost 59,000 devices had been distributed and connectivity had been provided to over 10,000 learners, with more dispatched since then. In many households, families will not have a dedicated device for each learner. To ensure families have flexibility, Glow can already be accessed on digital devices with modern browsers, and many elements can be accessed on consoles like Xbox or PlayStation. The BBC Scotland TV channel is providing content benchmarked to Scotland's curriculum starting this week. Education Scotland and the BBC are working to make it easy for teachers, learners and parents to navigate what is available and to understand how it aligns with wider learning. For all learners, particularly the very youngest children, some of the best learning already takes place through play, within the home, with parents or carers. I am mindful that working parents of very young children are finding it particularly difficult to balance childcare and work at the present moment. Resources are available via the Parent Club website to support parents in engaging children of all ages in meaningful activities. Teachers need support to feel confident that they can do the best for their students, and Education Scotland continue to provide a range of professional learning on digital learning and teaching via the digilearn.scot website. I am conscious of the impact the move to home learning will have for learners studying national qualifications. On the 8th of December, I confirmed the cancellation of higher and advanced higher exams in addition to National 5 exams. I also confirmed an alternative model for certification would be developed based on learner evidence and subject to quality assurance to deliver credible and fair results. Communications were issued by the National Qualifications 2021 group yesterday, setting out the priorities that schools and learners should focus on now, essentially on learning and teaching, while consideration is given to the implications of the move to remote learning and the length of time these arrangements will be in place on the new assessment model. I discussed this with the Chief Examining Officer yesterday, and the Education Recovery Group will consider this in more detail tomorrow. Presiding Officer, everything I have set out here on principles and entitlements is published online for all to refer to. We have worked with the General Teaching Council for Scotland to write to every registered teacher, making certain everyone delivering education is clear about our remote learning expectations and the resources available. Last Friday, I spoke with around 800 head teachers to discuss our expectations and will continue to engage directly with teachers as we deliver remote learning. I know schools are already doing their utmost for their pupils. They have responsibility for the quality of the education they provide and for ensuring continuous improvement. They will be improving their offers, reflecting on their experiences and on the feedback from parents and learners. Local authorities have statutory responsibility for ensuring the quality of education, including remote learning provided by their schools. This is emphasised in the Educational Continuity Direction issued on Friday, which states that each education authority is required to provide education by way of remote learning to pupils who normally attend schools under the management of the Education Authority from the 11th to the 29th of January 2021. Education Scotland has already gathered evidence on our system's readiness for remote learning, including by reviewing local authority plans for blended learning in the summer. I can announce today that the quality and effectiveness of remote learning across the country will be reviewed by Her Majesty's Inspectors of Education. A programme of national overviews will commence immediately and last for the duration of remote learning. These will evaluate what is working well and where further improvement is required, based on information collected from varied sources, including engagement with schools and local authorities. Her Majesty's Inspectors of Education are this week evaluating the first focus area, local authority planning and guidance on remote learning. These overviews will be published weekly. The first report will be published on Friday the 22nd of January. Schools are rightly deeply focused on delivering quality remote education now. We will make sure these reviews do not distract or burden them while providing important assurance to parents and ensuring further improvement in the remote learning offer where needed. I appreciate only too well the additional burden home learning is placing on many of our children and their families. I know the best place for our children is in their schools, with their teachers and their friends. Schools remain open for the most vulnerable children identified by teachers. For children of key workers who have no viable alternatives, schools are open on an exceptional basis. But to ensure we reduce the interactions around schools and so contribute to suppression of the virus, we have to keep numbers of key worker children to the absolute minimum required. We need employers to support employees in only taking up in-school learning where there is no alternative, only on the days they need it, and for the minimum amount of time. More childcare options exist during this lockdown. Childminders remain open and informal childcare is an option for some families. We have set out 3 categories of key workers to support local authorities in keeping numbers to a minimum. I am aware that remaining open for very small numbers of children creates pressure for some childcare providers, and I can therefore confirm we will make temporary financial support of up to £3.8 million available for each 4-week period of restrictions to providers of daycare of children who are open during these restrictions. We will confirm these details shortly and are considering further support to childminders. Against that background, I know many families are struggling and we need to make sure they get the support that they need. I can also announce today a package of £45 million of new funding to allow local authorities to deploy more support to their schools and families. The money will allow local authorities to prioritise the purchase of additional devices for children who still need them, recruit additional staff and provide support to parents and families to engage with home learning, responding to the First Minister's commitment to members last week. Local authorities will have flexibility to use their allocation within parameters, including these elements. This money is additional to the £160 million I have already committed for education recovery since the start of the pandemic. The funding is sufficient in principle to support the recruitment of an additional 2,000 teaching staff up until the end of the financial year. However, local authorities have the option to use it for other vital staffing needs, including classroom assistants, administrative staff to support contact tracing and facilities management staff. Since the start of the pandemic, our additional funding has led to an additional 1,400 teachers and over 200 support staff being appointed. Presiding Officer, my message to learners, teachers and parents is this. To learners, for whom this is a school year like no other, we will ensure you receive the support you need just now. I am committed to keeping the voice of young people central as we navigate the current challenges through the Scottish Youth Parliament and our new Youth Education Recovery Group. To teachers, I am deeply grateful for the work you have done to make remote learning work. Please access the advice, support and professional learning options through Education Scotland, your Regional Improvement Collaborative, your local authority and your school. And to parents, I reiterate, you are not expected to be teachers. Your child's school is here for you now and will be here for you when schools return. Presiding Officer, I do not want the current situation to continue any longer than it must to allow us to arrest the spread of this terrible virus. We have committed to a fortnightly review process with the aim of maximising the numbers receiving in-person learning, provided it is safe to do so. Cabinet will be considering the output from that first review on Tuesday, and we will communicate our decision thereafter. As the First Minister has made clear, this is not a simple choice between opening and closing schools. If the evidence tells us we can get some pupils back safely, we will maximise the numbers able to benefit. We will ensure all appropriate mitigations are in place to support a safe return. That includes exploring the role enhanced testing of school staff could play, pilots of 2 different models, one using in-school testing with lateral flow devices and another involving at-home testing using PCR tests, are planned to begin in a number of schools from next week. While this situation does last, I am determined to ensure we deliver remote learning well across all local authorities and schools. I am also determined to make sure the interventions we put in place are positive additions to the education system of the future, where remote learning offers opportunities like the chance to diversify subject choices, support rural communities and provide a robust offer for children whose schooling has been interrupted. The virus will be beaten and schools will return fully to intensify our efforts to achieve excellence and equity for all of Scotland's children.
Thank you very much, Cabinet Secretary. The Cabinet Secretary will now take questions on his statement. I must conclude around 12:30 for First Minister's questions, so can I ask members to be succinct and press their buttons now if they wish to ask a question. I call Jamie Green to be followed by Ian Gray. Mr Green.
Thank you, and can I thank the Cabinet Secretary for advance sight of his statement. We also thank everyone in education delivering learning and childcare in these difficult circumstances. But the move to remote learning has added pressures on teachers, on working parents, and more importantly on young people themselves. But this has been the government's contingency plan, its plan B, for quite some time now. So why, 10 months into this pandemic, are there still so many uncertainties, such as why access to meaningful remote learning has become a postcode lottery, whether or not teachers are supposed to perform live lessons or not, and many questions still remain over this year's qualifications model. So let me ask directly to the Deputy First Minister, why are young people being asked to use games consoles to access learning? Why does every pupil who needs a device to learn on still not have one? When will the additional funding that's been announced today actually hit the pockets of local authorities to get these new staff in place, given that we're already halfway through January? When will we finally see the full detail and guidance over the alternative certification model, given that so many are still completely in the dark over these plans? And finally, when will the government commit to calls from these benches to double financial support for online learning if schools do remain closed beyond the end of January?
Cabinet Secretary, a lot of questions, but if you can be succinct, please.
I don't accept the characterisation from Mr Green. I think he does a disservice to educational professionals who at this moment are working really hard delivering remote learning, live lessons, live interactions with pupils the length and breadth of the country. And that's all going on today and it's all been going on this week. In relation to some of the specifics, I recounted that we did a data collection exercise which identified that 70,000 young people were without devices that needed them. We have put in place the resources that have enabled 70,000 devices and connectivity packages to be in place. And I've just put new money on the table today for local authorities to fill any other gaps that they still face. And local authorities will get that. Once I've committed that money, local authorities know that money is coming to them, so they can commit to this expenditure that's required. On the alternative certification model, all of that detail has been published. What the National Qualifications Group is wrestling with is what is the implications of the move to remote learning that was announced a week ago. And that, well, all of the detail was published beforehand, but they are simply responding to the changes that have been announced a week ago. And they are taking care to consult with the education system, as the Priestley Review asked them to do, and they're doing it very well and to my satisfaction. And details were published yesterday on the steps that have been taken, and further details will be published shortly.
Ian Gray to be followed by Claire Adamson.
Thank you, and thanks to the Cabinet Secretary for early sight of his statement. It is clear that teachers in difficult circumstances have worked very hard over recent months in preparation for a sudden shift to remote learning, and that they were ready with materials and programmes for their pupils to continue learning at home. But many will feel that they have been let down by the national platforms on which they thought they could rely, most notably a widespread software failure. But there were also problems with the flagship eSchool platform. One head teacher told me that pupils logging in did not get the licence advertised, that links did not work, and that in any case, most subjects are still not covered. Then the SQA lived down to expectation by publishing an assessment update on their update, promising another update to come. Still looking for 2 to 4 assessments to be done, even suggesting teachers might invigilate these remotely, presumably using the IT, which was not at that point working. So, why did Education Scotland not fully stress test the IT they were recommending for schools well in advance? Is the eSchool offer also fixed today, and will it expand to all subjects? And isn't it time to accept that trusting teacher assessments is the only viable alternative to exams in the circumstances we face, and give teachers, pupils and parents some clarity now?
Can I just remind some members who are frowning that the front benches here do get a certain amount of time to ask their questions, Mr Coffey, so you can cheer up. Cabinet Secretary.
Can I welcome Ian Gray's recognition of the good work that teachers have done, because I think teachers have made a superb effort to be ready for these circumstances, and I appreciate that Mr Gray has acknowledged that, and I deprecate the fact that the Conservatives were unable to reflect that. Now, on the issues of IT, the Education Scotland's the GLOW system accesses Microsoft Teams. It is a provision delivered by Microsoft. Microsoft are the product suppliers. They deliver the platform upon which GLOW is based. So we look to Microsoft to fulfil their obligations as technology providers to ensure that is in place. Now, that was, there was a widespread problem which was not unique to GLOW on Monday. It was affected a whole range of different organisations using Microsoft Teams. I suspect it was probably to do with the fact there were so many people accessing Microsoft Teams on Monday. But Microsoft have addressed these issues to our satisfaction, and the system operated well yesterday, and I'm informed it's working well today. In relation to the National e-learning offer, there are over 500 recorded lessons available through the National e-learning offer. eSchool is providing coverage across a range of different courses. Finally, on assessment, teacher estimates are going to be the underpinning of the alternative certification model. What has been agreed with the National Qualifications Group is a number of different elements of in-school assessments that will inform that teacher judgment. Now, that was the model that was put in place prior to the move to remote learning. What the National Qualifications Group is looking at, and I stress that the National Qualifications Group is a group representative of a range of different interested parties. It's led by the SQA, but it involves a whole range of different organisations, including our professional associations, is looking at how the move to remote learning affects the delivery of that alternative certification model. And I'm very keen to give the system some time to think through the implications of these issues and then to communicate those directly, which is what will be done in very short order.
Thank you. I have 20 minutes, 14 people wanting to ask questions. You can do the arithmetic, important in an education debate. I take Claire Adamson, followed by Oliver Mundell. 6 questions, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Deputy First Minister, we know that many parents and carers will be concerned for young people at the moment, and while schools are open for vulnerable children and key worker children of key workers, there will be, for whatever reason, additional support needs pupils who will not be attending school. Can you outline what support will be available to them to ensure that they are not disadvantaged while unable to attend school and working from home?
Thank you. Cabinet Secretary.
Presiding Officer, it's important that schools make a judgment about the individual needs of individual pupils who have additional support needs. And for some of those young people, there will be an argument for them to be in school. For others, they may be better supported at home. So that individual judgment is made by schools. I discussed this issue extensively with head teachers on Friday because I spoke to a number of head teachers of special schools who were making that judgment, and they made the very precise point to me that some young people would be better supported at home in an environment where their learning and their support could be delivered. So it will be very much tailored towards the needs of each individual pupil, and I hope that gives Claire Adamson the reassurance she seeks.
Thank you. Oliver Mundell, followed by Kenneth Gibson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Can I ask the Cabinet Secretary if he thinks it's acceptable, as some parents in my constituency are reporting, that their children are being offered no live element when it comes to home learning, and what's he doing to make sure that there's consistency across the country?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, I set out in my statement that guidance has been issued by Education Scotland on the expectations around remote learning. That was published on Friday by Education Scotland, communicated to every single teacher in the country by the General Teaching Council. Her Majesty's Inspectorate of Education will review the delivery of remote learning around the country to assess the degree to which expectations are being fulfilled, and will work with local authorities through the Association of Directors of Education to ensure that schools in all circumstances are delivering our expectations on remote learning.
Kenneth Gibson, followed by Daniel Johnson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Remote learning is key to ensuring pupils continue their education. Can the Deputy First Minister confirm the minimum number of remote learning hours pupils will receive each week? Are there enough supply teachers trained in delivering remote learning if required in the event of teacher illness? And how will pupils with additional support needs be supported to learn remotely?
That's 3 questions. Cabinet Secretary.
Presiding Officer, as I said in my answer to Mr Mundell, the guidance has been published on the expectations around remote learning, which will be a mixture of direct live lessons and other learning tasks that can be carried out independently by pupils, as would be the case within school on an ongoing basis. In relation to pupils with additional support needs, their needs will be assessed individually by schools and appropriate delivery mechanisms put in place to support those young people. And finally, in relation to staffing, obviously because of remote learning, we have staff who are, for example, perhaps self-isolating, who then ordinarily wouldn't be able to attend at school, provided they are well, will still be able to deliver learning from home. So I'm confident that we have, particularly given the investment the government has made in additional teaching staff, that we have adequate teaching staff in place to deliver the learning that's expected. Daniel
Johnson, followed by Annabel Ewing.
I would like to ask the Cabinet Secretary more about the National Qualifications Group. Given that the document on teacher assessment for national awards was published in October and assumed a high degree of classroom learning, and given that teachers will be presumably expected to submit their estimates and other evidence in coming weeks, when will the revised guidance be published by the National Qualifications Group and/or the SQA?
Cabinet Secretary.
I think it's important that I stress that the guidance will be published by the National Qualifications Group and not exclusively by the SQA, because the SQA are working very collaboratively with professional associations, directors of education and local authorities to make sure that we have system-wide, and Colleges Scotland, to ensure we have system-wide buy-in to the approach that we take. I expect that guidance to be published very shortly, but it is dependent on the extent of time in which remote learning has got to operate. And obviously, as I've indicated, I want to keep that to a minimum. But it will be published shortly to enable the system to be clear about expectations about assessment. But the key point in the guidance issued yesterday was to focus the system on the delivery of learning and teaching at this particular time, because certification will only be able to be fully deployed if all of the learning and teaching for qualifications has been completed during this year. So I would encourage schools to concentrate on the delivery of learning and teaching and to consider the assessment issues, which may involve certain changes to the timetable for submission of estimates, for example, to be left until that is clarified by the National Qualifications Group.
Annabel Ewing, followed by Liz Smith.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. On the issue of key workers, I have been contacted by some parents in my Cowdenbeath constituency who are a bit confused about the position being adopted by Fife Council. And whilst I understand that the specific definition of key workers is a matter for the local authorities, can I ask the Deputy First Minister if anything can be done to ensure greater clarity and transparency so that parents know exactly where they stand as far as in-school and nursery education provision is concerned?
Cabinet Secretary.
Presiding Officer, we've set out 3 categories of key workers. Category 1 is essentially health and social care workers that are critical to the COVID emergency. The second group is wider emergency staffing across a range of different sectors. And thirdly, are a group of workers upon which the functioning of the Scottish economy is critical. Now, obviously, we've left flexibility for local authorities to interpret that guidance and to apply it more specifically, because in some parts of the country, those factors, for example, a part of the country that's more dependent on food processing, for example, for the Scottish economy, will have a greater, will have greater considerations in that respect to consider. So there is flexibility there for local authorities, but I think the key point that I have to make in response to Annabel Ewing's question is that we must keep to a minimum the number of key worker children that present at school, because only by that mechanism can we contribute to the national effort to reduce human interaction and therefore to stop the circulation of the virus. So we have to keep those numbers to an absolute minimum in the steps that we take forward.
Liz Smith, followed by Beatrice Wishart.
Thank you. Could I ask the Cabinet Secretary what discussions he or Education Scotland has had with the BBC Scotland and other TV channels about additional support for all those pupils whose first language is not English and who are obviously under very considerable pressure during this pandemic?
Cabinet Secretary.
There has been very good discussion between Education Scotland and BBC Scotland, and I spoke to the Director of BBC Scotland on all of these issues in the course of last week. There will be very specific measures put in place by individual schools to make sure that the learning of young people where English is not their first language is supported. Obviously, schools know those pupils well. That has to be very finely targeted work that is put in place. And it's a big challenge for schools because there will be a very broad range of languages spoken in our schools, as Liz Smith will be familiar. So that fundamentally will be a school-based responsibility to establish that dialogue.
Beatrice Wishart, followed by Willie Coffey.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Families' lives and livelihoods revolve around their childcare arrangements. The government can't simply gamble on employers being understanding and flexible. There does need to be a robust system. Families need to make safe arrangements without putting themselves at risk or sacrificing their careers. And if forced, those decisions will impact women the most. So what should families without a childcare place or an informal option do?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, Presiding Officer, we are in quite exceptional circumstances just now, and I'm afraid we do have to ask employers to work with us in this respect. We've put into law that people should stay at home unless they have a reasonable justification for leaving home. That is now the law of Scotland. And we do that not because we're keen to do it, but because we have to do it. And we have to have employers working with us and supporting us in enabling employees to stay at home, to minimise the number of children that are at school, so we reduce the human interaction in our society and reduce the spread of the virus. These are, I am afraid, the hard consequences of trying to tackle COVID. And we are putting in place as much flexibility as we can around the provision of childcare. There is more in place than was in place from March last year. But we have to be very robust in making sure that we reduce the level of human interaction in our society, or the virus will overwhelm our National Health Service.
Willie Coffey, followed by Ross Greer.
Thank you. I'm delighted to hear of the considerable efforts being made by my former colleagues in Education Scotland to support learning and teaching at this time. But can I ask the Deputy First Minister, in relation to online learning, if he is able to provide an update on the Scottish Government guidance to be published, which will require daily interaction with young people in a live learning context, as he previously mentioned in his answer to me at last week's COVID committee?
Cabinet Secretary.
Presiding Officer, this detail was published by Education Scotland on Friday, and as I indicated, one of my earlier answers communicated directly to all members of the General Teaching Council. So that communication went out on Friday. It links directly to a very helpful page on the Education Scotland website that relates all of the guidance and the sources of remote learning materials. And I think it's really a very convenient and helpful way for the information to be presented to members of the teaching profession.
Ross Greer, followed by Alison Harris.
Thank you. Some special schools across the country are operating as normal, having designated all pupils as vulnerable. This might be justified by the complex needs of their pupils, but a number of teachers and staff have contacted me with concerns for their health as a result. It's impossible to socially distance in a special school setting when teachers are also fulfilling a personal care role similar to that of a care worker. So can I ask if the staff in the unique setting of special schools are being considered for priority access to vaccinations?
You had some difficulty getting all that. Did you manage to get it all?
I did, Presiding Officer, yes. I think that the point that Mr Greer makes about some staff, and it won't be all staff, but some staff who are attending to the personal care needs of young people in special schools, I think do raise significant issues about whether they are part of the education workforce or the health and social care workforce. So that's an issue that has been actively explored, and just because the staff are delivering their work in a school setting, I don't think should determine whether they are school staff or health and social care staff, because their functions may essentially be health and social care staff. So that issue is being explored at the present moment.
I have 5 members in about 10 minutes, so if we're good to each other, we'll get through them all. Alison Harris, followed by Claire Baker.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. Whilst I appreciate that you're making temporary financial support available to the daycare of children providers, you say that you're considering further support to childminders. May I ask, when do you think this support will be available for them?
Cabinet Secretary.
We're looking very directly at the approach here, because, as Alison Harris will appreciate, some childminders may be able to operate in the present environment almost on the same basis as they would normally be operating. And we have to make sure that we have an approach that directly supports individuals in the fashion that all of our business support is designed to do, to make sure that individuals or businesses can make it to the other side of the pandemic, if I can put it as colloquially as that. So we have to look with care at that, because some childminders may be able to operate almost normally in normal operations. So we'll come to those conclusions as early as we possibly can do, because I'm anxious to make sure that there is no uncertainty for childminders in this process.
Claire Baker, followed by John Mason.
Thank you. I want to follow on from Ross Greer's questions, and I want to ask about the definition of vulnerability. The first lockdown operated a hub model with restricted attendance, but this time the guidance is resulting in the widespread reopening of ASN and DAS settings, and I believe that's putting staff and pupils at an increased risk. Will the Cabinet Secretary review the criteria to encourage and support restricted attendance and blended learning?
Cabinet Secretary.
I think there's a judgment to be made by schools, and particularly by special schools and schools that are supporting young people with additional support needs, as to whether it would be better for a young person to be educated in school or supported at home. And schools are making those judgments. Now, we'll be looking very carefully at the data that emerges about the number of pupils who are presenting at schools, because I have to be mindful of the number of pupils and staff that are in our schools, because if we don't reduce that, we will not get the benefit of essentially moving to a remote learning platform on the wider suppression of the virus within Scotland. Now, I'm looking at that data on a daily basis, and it's very early days for me to see any patterns in that data, but I will update Parliament on whether or not we need to take any other action in that respect to make sure that we're reducing the numbers of young people and staff that are presenting in school.
John Mason, followed by Neil Finlay.
Thank you. There seem to have been problems in England with the free school meal parcels that children have been getting if they're not at the school building, and there's been an apology from the supplier. Can the Deputy First Minister assure us that low-income families in Scotland are getting sufficient nutritious food?
Cabinet Secretary.
President Officer, the overwhelming majority of local authorities in Scotland have decided not to offer food parcels, but to offer direct financial support to families. Now, if my recollection is correct, I think all but one local authority in Scotland either offers vouchers or cash payments to families to enable families to make their choices about how to utilise their resources. And of course, one of the key points that underpins the government's policies on family support is the recognition that direct financial assistance and direct financial control for families is one of the strongest mechanisms that can be deployed to tackle poverty and to ensure families can make their own judgments. So I hope that addresses the point that Mr Mason has raised with me, but obviously the quality of support is essential to make sure that children are supported with nutritious food at this time.
Neil Finlay, followed by Alistair Allen.
Thanks. On Monday I asked families who did not have a computer or broadband access to get onto online learning to get in touch with me and detail their problems. Within 24 hours, 100 families had made contact, and I think this is very worrying. If 100 families from one single social media post in a limited area that my social media reach will get to, contacted me, then what is the situation across the country in terms of those families who cannot access online learning? What's the government doing to quantify that and address it?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, we did a data collection exercise with local authorities last year, and that identified that 70,000 young people had needed to have devices or connectivity packages to help them access learning. And the government put in place resources, some with the direct provision of Chromebooks, some with direct funding to local authorities, that enabled about 70,000 needs to be met. Now, I accept that that's a moving picture, and there may be other cases that will emerge. That's why I've put more resources on the table today to support local authorities in that endeavour, should they experience circumstances of the type that Mr Finlay has raised with me today.
And Alistair Allen.
To ask the Deputy First Minister if he is able to provide an update on the discussions taking place with local authorities and teaching unions on the testing pilot for school staff, so that those who work in our schools feel reassured about returning to work when it is safe to do so. Cabinet Secretary.
I think I heard the core point of Dr Allen's question, which was on testing of arrangements in schools, and we have a number of pilot studies that are now underway, which we will be commencing next week. We also, of course, have the facility available to teaching staff at any time through their employer to request a PCR test if they're concerned about it. So they don't need to be symptomatic. They can secure a test should they wish one, and that is available to members of the teaching staff. It's not available to many other groups of employees, but it is available to teaching staff, and we are working to build that testing capacity to enable us to be confident about a return to face-to-face learning. Of course, the best way to secure a return to face-to-face learning is to see a massive reduction in the prevalence of coronavirus within our communities, and that's the most assured way in which we can see a return to face-to-face learning, and that's why it's important that everybody complies with the measures that the government has put in place and which merit compliance to ensure that we can reduce the prevalence of the virus and get young people back into schools.
Thank you. That concludes the question on the statement. Can I thank the Cabinet Secretary and members? Everyone managed to get to their question. Thank you very much. And there'll be a short break for the next bit.